everybody. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Coral. I am one of two and part of Butchered True Crime. We are a true crime podcast. You can find us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to keep up with what we're doing, who we're talking about. We're going to have some crazy stuff up our sleeve for this year, and we are so excited for you all to be a part of it, and I cannot thank you enough. If you're wondering where I'm at or what that background noise is, I am at a kava bar here in West Palm Beach. It is called Hakuna Makava. They're actually sponsoring this as my first solo video, and I could not be more thankful to them. They have amazing products. They're amazing people. Danielle Rothmel is the owner, and her husband, Blake, and they also happen to be my bosses. Yes, I also work here, so if you're seeing this video and you've been wanting to come check us out, or even if you still come on a regular basis, you can mention that you saw this, and maybe we'll have a little something for you. I cannot thank you all enough for tuning in and listening. Your support means the world to me, and I'm really excited to be doing this, and I'm just pumped. You may notice Jess is not with me. This is my solo video. Love you, Jess. I'll see you tomorrow. So let's jump right into it. So today I'll be covering the case of Gabriel Fernandez. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with it. A very popular Netflix show had came out in 2020 on February 20th that got this case a lot of traction. I feel like it was very overlooked when it was going on back in 2013 when it had originally taken place. But now that there's a Netflix documentary on it, everybody is talking about it again. It's a case that I feel like a lot of people are familiar with. And if you're not, then hey, this is the video for you to, educate yourself and learn about some stuff that happened. If you're a true crime fanatic like me, I'm sure you'll find this case as interesting as I did, my fellow weirdos. So I'm sure I will butcher a few names. I am Hispanic, but my pronunciation, I've heard people call him Gabriel, and I've also heard Gabriel. So I'm just going to trust my gut and let the names flow out of me, whether they're correct or incorrect. So Gabriel Daniel Fernandez was born on February 20th in 2005. He was born to Arnold Contreras and Pearl Fernandez. Unfortunately, in the early stages of his life, his father was not a part of the picture. He was in and out of jail, and he had actually had two older siblings, Ezekiel Fernandez and Virginia Fernandez. When Pearl became pregnant with Gabriel, the family was pretty much off board. They did not want to help. They were not supportive of her having this child. So I can imagine that would make it a little bit harder on her, especially having the child's father in and out of jail. Baby mama drama. But anyways, Pearl pretty much decided when she was pregnant with him, with the opinions of her family and the lack of support, that she did not want this kid. And that is a notion that you'll notice that she has even before he's born. While he's inside of her, you can find her commenting to family members like, I don't fucking want this, like things along those lines, some nasty stuff. So when Gabriel was born, Pearl called her great uncle, Michael Lemos Carranza, and his partner, David Martinez. And she basically pops Gabriel out, and after 3 hours calls her great uncle and is like, come get this kid. He's already pissing me off. This is a newborn child we're talking about. He's going to cry. He's going to scream. I mean, you had two kids prior. You should know what to expect. I just think she didn't want him from the jump, and she was finding any excuse to pass him on to somebody else, so she did not have that responsibility. She did have two other kids, but you'll notice throughout this that they faced nowhere near what Gabriel went through. So what we can pick up from the start, he's already unwanted. He's passed on to another family member. Let me mention that this family member is gay, and him and his partner would go on to raise Gabriel. They raised him for 4 years. They love this kid. They give him the best life that they possibly could. Sending him to school, he was always smiling. You'll see in the documentary and on a lot of news sources that his uncles would always describe him as being a light. and being giggling, even as a newborn baby, always had a smile on his face. And I think that really represents who Gabriel was as a person, truly had this light within him. And you can see it in pictures too. I mean, whenever I see a picture of him, I can't help but feel emotional because I can see the pureness and love that this child had. And so throughout being raised by his gay uncles, his gunkles, we'll call them, he had, a real shot at life, a real shot of being loved and having a future. Well, Pearl's family found out, obviously knew that they were raising him, and they had always had an issue with their sexuality. Apparently gay was not okay in this family. Gabriel's grandparents would go on to take Gabriel away from Michael Lemos Carranza and his partner David Martinez, the gunkles, the gay uncles. We love them. And they would speculate that Gabriel was gay because of the environment that he was raised in. And there's no signs that point to him being gay in any way. I mean, he was a normal little boy, he was interested in things that little boys are interested in. And I think the family stereotyped him at such a young age that I'm sure there was moments that he believed that he was. But there's no proof or anything that he was gay. So they remove him from the gay uncles and they go on to raise him. He lived with his grandparents until 2012 when his mother, Pearl Fernandez, and her boyfriend at the time, Isiar, oh my God, I'm going to butcher his name. No pun intended. Isauro Aguirre, he goes by Tony, so I'm going to refer to him as Tony throughout this podcast, and this is Pearl's significant other or boyfriend at the time. And Pearl, if you don't remember, is Gabriel's mother. So they decided that they wanted Gabriel back for God knows what reason. You didn't want him in the first place, and now you want him back. Make it make sense. So they regained physical custody of him despite concerns of his welfare that his family had expressed. So within the first couple of weeks that Pearl had Gabriel back in her custody with his siblings, Virginia and Ezekiel, he would go to his cousin's house or his grandparents, and they would notice black eyes, bruises, abrasions, and didn't really say much about it because I feel like out of all of his injuries constantly throughout the 8 months that he was in the care of Pearl and Tony was, oh, he was playing rough. Oh, he fell off his dirt bike, which is all lies. So I think his parents lied to the point where they started to believe their lies. He was actually hurting himself and falling and playing rough, but that was not the case. Throughout his 8-month stay in the household of Pearl Fernandez and Tony, Gabriel Fernandez was systematically abused and tortured. The abuse included regular physical beatings, causing broken bones, being forced to eat cat litter, feces, and his own vomit, spoiled and expired foods, being burned with cigarettes, being shot with BB guns in various areas of his body, including the face, groin. He was also pepper sprayed and forced to wear women's clothing. Now, this was something that Tony would do. He would make him wear a dress. Actually, when the night that Gabriel had passed away, when the paramedics had shown up in Gabriel's closet, all of his clothes were in trash bags under the sink. And the only thing that was hanging in his closet were 3 little girl dresses. So that can kind of give you an insight of what he endured in those 8 months. And this is just what we know from, the autopsy and what had came back and from word of mouth. So throughout this 8-month period, all this is happening, right? Gabriel is going to school. Gabriel is being around his family. And this kid looks rough. He was going through it. And this is where the case will come into where we start to question if this was the neglect of a mother to her son or the failure of a system that was put in place originally to protect him. So by saying that, what I mean is family members would reach out to police officers, CPS, teachers had reaching out to police officers, CPS, and Pearl would find her way to lie out of it. And if you look up pictures of Pearl Fernandez, she's a beautiful Latina woman. And she's one of those women who knew she was pretty and would use that. Oh, it makes me sick to my stomach, honestly and truly, the stuff that they did to this poor boy. So, family members are calling CPS. CPS is doing regular checkups at this point at the house, and Pearl would intercept them at the door or whatever the case was and get to speak to them first and tell them, no, my son is lying. No, he fell off a dirt bike. No, he was playing with his brother, so on and so forth. And they believed her. And if you look at pictures of Gabriel, you are not falling off of, what they had said he was falling off of, or playing that rough and enduring these kinds of injuries. So on top of all the horrible things, I think one of the parts of this case that really resonated with me was the cabinet. So the majority of Gabriel's home life throughout these 8 months was spent gagged and bound in a tiny cabinet in his parents' room, in his mother's room. Tony is not his father. So this poor boy, day in, day out, would go hungry, tired, scared, alone, locked in this cabinet right feet away from the bed where his mom laid her head every night. And something about Gabriel is he loved his mom. Despite the horrible things that he endured from both her and Tony, he continued to love her. And that is where we see the innocence and pureness in children, that they can't conceptually understand being hated or disliked or abused or beaten. They will come back and love you still with everything that they've got, because that's what they know. That's his mom. His mother and stepfather found this amusing, this type of torture or what they had put him through. They found enjoyment in this. They would laugh. You can see text messages back and forth between Tony and Pearl, joking and mocking that he's in a dress or that he's in a closet or that she had fed him cat litter that night. And it's sick and demented and twisted. And I really can't wrap my brain around why anybody would do that to such a sweet little boy. So, according to prosecutors, Tony was allegedly motivated to abuse Fernandez because he believed that Gabriel was gay. So this now turns into the question of, is this a hate crime? Well, unfortunately, when the case went to trial, you really have to pick and choose your battles. And they had chosen to not go that route, to shed more light on the abuse that he had endured. Not so much the reason behind it, because there is no reason that or excuse in any book why any kid should ever, ever, ever have to go through any of this. And I think that was just a poor excuse. So Gabriel had a teacher, Jennifer Garcia, and she had taken notice to his black eyes, his weird shaved head, the bruises and cuts all over him, and felt like, I need to do something about this. So she went forth and called the school hotline and was like, hey, I think I need to report a case. The man on the hotline then asked her, well, can you describe what's happening to me, and I will tell you if you need to report it or not. When she begins to describe the state that Gabriel would come to class in every day, the operator cuts her off and goes, yes, report that immediately. Did anything come of it? No. Would Gabriel return to school days later with fresh cuts and fresh bruises while others still are not even healed? Yes. And, these systems are set in place to protect our children. These hotlines, these procedures we have to take when we see abuse, they're set there to protect him. And I really feel like they failed. And it makes me so sad. So on May 22nd, 2013, Gabriel was taken to a hospital with severe injuries, including a cracked skull, broken ribs, and burns on his skin. He died 2 days later as a result of these traumatic injuries that he endured. So the night of May 22nd, the initial 911 phone call was placed in, and it was Tony on the phone with the police, Gabriel's mother's boyfriend. And he said, ring, ring, 911. What's your emergency? Yeah, my girlfriend's son was playing with our other son, and they roughed house, and we came out, and he's not breathing. And the operator says, okay, sir, are you performing CPR? Are you, taking the necessary steps? Is he breathing? Is he not breathing? Is there blood? Trying to get a description of what was going on. And I don't know if anyone's ever given CPR who's watching this, but if you're talking and giving CPR, like you're putting your whole into it and you can hear it. And it does not, it just sounds like he's talking from another room when you listen to the police report. So paramedics arrive on scene. Gabriel is on the floor, and I mean, what these EMTs described that they saw was horrific. Not the injuries of a slip and fall play with your brother. These are the injuries of months of prolonged abuse and neglect. And I think that initially shocked everybody. And on top of that, to make it worse, you would think if your child is unconscious and not breathing and you initially call 911, that you would be hysterical. I mean, tell me one parent that when their kid falls and scrapes their knee isn't slightly hysterical. So that was a big red flag. Big red flag. Also, Pearl Fernandez and Tony did not want to follow Gabriel to the hospital. I mean, your son is hanging on within an inch of his life, and they didn't try to get in the ambulance, didn't ask what hospital he's being taken to, could care less, were more preoccupied with his brother Ezekiel and sister Virginia and what was going to happen with them and who was watching them while they were being interviewed by the police, and it just seemed like a cop-out. The entire time, too, her mannerisms, her body language are more nervous than scared for her child, which once again I think really sheds light to what was going on within those 8 months of him being in the care of Tony and Pearl. Now we're gonna go back a little bit, talk a little bit about Pearl's background. Pearl grew up rough. The neighborhood of California where she had grown up is not far actually from where I grew up. And I can testify to a lot of Hispanic gangs, a lot of drug use, a lot of violence, a lot of guns. It will really harden a child very quickly. So Pearl endured abuse from her father and mother and neglect throughout her life. And I feel like she resented Gabriel because he represented pureness and the childhood that she was robbed, essentially. So she's like, well, if I can't be happy and if I can't have a decent childhood, why should he get to have one? This woman hated her son. The things, the text messages, the way she carried herself. I mean, outside of the abuse that she and Tony had done on Gabriel, this was a woman who did not like her kid. So Pearl Fernandez and Isario Aguirre were charged with murder and found guilty in 2018. They were both sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. This case was very interesting because the death penalty is not something that is thrown around very often, but I feel like everybody involved in this case felt that it was necessary. And I agree. I mean, as well as being thrown in jail for what they had done to him, their shots of surviving were not very high. So in light of also Tony and Pearl becoming arrested, this also brought forth a huge notion of the failures of child protective service systems, and it led to changes in the way that child abuse cases are handled in the state of California. Social workers were fired, and new procedures were implemented to prevent similar failures in the future. Now, we're talking about a system that's been set in place for quite some time now. And it took something this bad and this traumatic to happen for everybody to kind of wake up and say, well, what are we doing? You know, why was this case overlooked so many times? Why did they not enter the home? Why did they not take Gabriel to the hospital to be assessed? It's part of their procedure when showing up and seeing wounds to the extent that Gabriel had endured to take him to a hospital immediately. I mean, outside of a social worker's obligation to that child, that's anybody's obligation if you see a child hurt or in danger to do whatever the hell you can to help them. So I also think that, oh God, this is like heavy to say. these are people that are doing their job. They work in social work, whether that be coming into the workplace in the morning and being able to leave as soon as they can. Don't go into it if your heart's not into it. You're working with children that don't have a voice and don't have a way to get help, and you are their way out, and you're failing them time and time and time again. And it took a case this traumatic and this heart-wrenching and scary in order for changes to be made. We should not have to wait for things to come into light that are this horrific before changes are being made. And I was lucky enough to be raised by two loving parents and never had any stint with foster care or the system or CPS. But from what I've heard from close friends, it does more harm than it does good. This kid should have been removed from the household and placed back into the care of his gay uncles, where he was safe and loved and protected. He was robbed at his shot of life, and at his shot of bringing joy into the world. So the trials of Gabriel Fernandez aired on Netflix February 20th of 2020, which was 7 years after the initial case had taken place, and coincidentally aired on Gabriel's birthday, which I didn't realize until I was putting my notes together for this, that they had aired it on his birthday, which is sad. But I'm really glad that this case is on Netflix and that people can watch it and speculate and form opinions on whether, this is the fault of the child's parents or, once again, the system that was set in place to protect him. All right, so where are they now? Pearl is currently serving time at Central California Women's Facility after being sentenced to life without a possibility of parole. In 2018, she pled guilty to first-degree murder and murder involving torture. Her plea deal meant that she evaded the death penalty. Smart girl. In 2021, a judge had rejected the now 39-year-old's bid for resentencing. So most of you that know anything about jail, they do not take lightly to child abusers, child rapists, things to that degree. So I could imagine that Pearl had a really hard time in prison. And actually a woman named Yvette Garcia claimed to have been serving time at Central California Women's Facility when Pearl was sentenced, and shared details on the assaults that she had faced. Garcia goes on to say that her fellow inmates were aware of Pearl's crimes and had planned to get her when she arrived at prison. Inmates ended up slicing her up with a lid of a tuna can. Garcia says other inmates threw hot water over Pearl. She says that the inmate behind the assault, Angel Annie Medina, passed away in a shooting after getting released from prison. We know Pearl has gang affiliation, so who knows if that ended up being linked, but nobody really knows that for sure. So that is what's going on with Pearl now. There is Tony, or Isario Aguirre. Following Gabriel's death, Isario was eventually tried in 2018 and was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to the death penalty, and according to NBC News, he is currently on death row in San Quentin State Prison in California. So death row is a very complicated thing. There's, 700 people in line before him. So who knows when the time will come, but hopefully it will come soon. And as far as the caseworkers that had worked on Gabriel's case, many of them were fired or moved departments into a lower grade where they weren't as involved with children. Yeah, I think that's really all, on this case that we can touch on. If you want more information, the Netflix documentary is amazing. You can get some more insight and, hear these phone calls and see these pictures. And I really urge everybody to educate themselves on this case. And I'm also going to include some hotlines if you see, abuse, the steps that we can take. And it's all about educating each other. And this is a big part of the reason why I'm really excited to do this podcast and talk about these cases, as horrific and horrible as they are, it's also bringing attention to things that I feel like a lot of people brush off their shoulder. You know, nobody wants to face death. Nobody wants to come to terms with that a child was beaten within an inch of his life and passed because of it. These are the hard truths and the reality of the world that we're living in today. And I think the more that we talk about it and educate one another, the more progressive we can be moving forward in handling these situations and knowing what to do to prevent the outcome that Gabriel Fernandez had to face. So yeah, I'm Coral, and this is Butchered True Crime.